If you are an e4 player, you gotta be ready to face the Petrov's Defense, when black responds symmetrically with knight to f6 counterattacking your own pawn on e4. And as you capture their pawn on e5, they could either go for the symmetric variation, the Petrov's Defense, or they can go for the Stafford Gambit, which is actually a lot more common on amateur level. They're challenging your knight, and after this exchange, they're actually open up so many lines and different opportunities for them to attack very quickly in the game. And I would actually not recommend that you go for this variation, because even though objectively speaking white is fine, but those who play Stafford Gambit, they do that all the time. They have a lot of experience, they know a bunch of tricks here, and it's better to do something different. The way to turn the situation around is to strike in the center yourself by going pawn to d4, attacking their pawn. And by doing so, you are kind of saying, I'm going to be having a head start in my attack, you're going to be the one struggling, and I'm also dragging you into the territory that you're unfamiliar with. Now, after we play pawn to d4, they're at the crossroad, they could either take this pawn or this one on e4. Which one do you think they would take? In most cases, they actually take this one on d4 because these pawns are attacking each other, which is actually wrong because it gives way to your pawn to be pushed forward and to attack their knight. Anyway, we'll talk about that in a moment, but let's start with knight takes e4, which is also extremely common. Now, here there's a very tricky variation where you just recapture this pawn on e5, and what it creates is that this knight on e4 is a little bit shaky. Because think about this, there aren't many squares where this knight can possibly retreat to. It can't retreat to the g5 square as well, as white is controlling that, which makes this position vulnerable. And you can play something like queen to d5 and even try to just grab this knight right on the next move. Therefore, black really needs to be careful. Now, another tempting idea for black is playing bishop c5, teaming up against your pawn on f2, which looks like nearly a winning move by black. But there is a very juicy counterattack. You're playing bishop to c4, kind of similar to the Traxler counter gambit, where you allow them to capture this pawn on f2, but instead you plan your own devastating counterattack. Now, they can either take with a knight or with a bishop. Both moves are obviously possible. Taking with a bishop seems to be like a very tempting option, grabbing a pawn, checking your king, and looks like black is winning. But in the reality, it's just the opposite. After king to f1, now the whole situation is very shaky. The knight can now retreat because it has to guard the bishop. But white is also threatening to play queen to d5, which would put pressure not only to this knight on e4, but also to this pawn on f7. And black just can't hold on to all of the weaknesses that they have, so it's going to crumble away very quick. For example, if they castle or virtually do anything else, you then play queen to d5, and black can't save these two pieces. In this game, they tried to at least get a pawn for the knight, which they're going to lose anyways. They played knight g3, and after this exchange, they got a pawn, but it turned out to be even worse, because now this rook is getting active along the h-file. White played bishop g5, hitting the queen. Black must move the queen. The f-pawn cannot move because it's pinned down to the king. Therefore, they need to move the queen away. After this, white played queen e4, capitalizing on this open file, and already threatening queen takes h7 mate. Black thought that g6 can stop this, but white came up with a phenomenal move, queen takes g6. Very sudden sacrifice. It turns out that this pawn is still pinned, therefore black is forced to recapture by the h-pawn, but after bishop f6, rook to h8 is coming and black can't stop it. Quick announcement, we are hiring a content writer. If you're interested in a remote job and you can work together with me and my team of the Remote Chess Academy, you can get to know all the details by clicking the link below the video in the description. That covers bishop takes f2, which looks tempting for black, but in fact is a losing error. Knight takes f2 is better, but of course, we also have something very powerful here. We're going to counter with bishop takes f7, which is a temporary sacrifice. We're calling the king out, and after that we follow up with queen to d5, double attack. That is the point of our sacrifice. This forces the king to move, and after that we're going to get our bishop back. Now, where will the king move? There are a couple options, and most of them are losing errors. It's certainly not easy to make the right pick. Now, going to f8 is one of those losing errors, because now not only we grab a bishop, but we do so with checking their king, which means that on the next move we'll be able to grab their knight on f2 and we'll end up with an extra piece and we'll keep attacking. That is really bad for black. Now, instead of king to f8, the most played move by black is king to e8, which looks like the most normal human move to play, just putting the king back to safety. But here we have one more trick. Instead of getting the bishop right away, which would allow black to grab our rook, we do something else. We play bishop g5, hitting their queen. That forces them to drop this bishop back, as there is no other way to save their queen. But after this, what it does is it pushes this bishop away, leaving this knight on f2 undefended. And after the trade and queen captures, we can just grab this hanging knight. And at the end of the day, we can see the position where the material balance is equal. However, we are far ahead in development and we're just having a superior position. Their king has moved back and forth, therefore it can castle in this game. It's going to stay in the center. And we're just going to play knight c3, rook e1, maybe e6 at some point, and we're going to attack. They're having a cramped position. They're having a hard time developing their pieces. If they ever go d6, it's going to only help us to put our rook to the e-file and to grab and attack their pieces along the e-file. So it's probably already waiting for white. Stockfish calmly suggests that black should scream banzai and go king g6. And Stockfish also claims that it is an equal position, which is hard to comprehend for such a crazy situation. Anyway, if one of your opponents ever plays king g6, which is unlikely, you can call Kramnik on him and he'll regret his life choices. Like, the idea of black here is that after this, white has to go for this queen takes c5 knight h1 line, and temporarily black is up a rook because they just grab this rook in the corner. However, this knight is not going to get out. It's trapped there, and sooner or later white is very likely to get it back. While we'll probably just play knight c3, something like bishop f4, castle, and get this knight back at some point. Then they'll be having a minor piece against the rook. However, black's king is very exposed, which gives white some counterattacking chances. This is a pretty complex position. Anyway, realistically, it's quite unlikely that you'll ever have to play it. All in all, playing bishop c5 for black is very tricky. White's got massive counterattack, and if black does not know what they're doing, they're going to be losing the game within a couple next moves. Therefore, pawn to d5 is the most solid choice, and that's how pros usually play this position, just solidifying the knight and aiming for standard normal development. In this case, it's recommended that you play knight to d2 and trade off this knight. Now, why do we move the knight to d2 and not to c3? Well, if you move the knight to c3 after this trade, you have to ruin your pawn structure, and you don't want that. That is why instead you put the knight right here on d2 and you offer this exchange. If they do so, great, you trade it off their excellent knight. After this, let's say both sides will probably develop, you bring the bishop right here, they castle, and now there's an important moment. Of course, you can simply castle, getting a standard opening position. However, it's even stronger to play pawn h4, launching this sudden kingside attack which your opponent did not expect. And quite often, before he can comprehend what's going on here, he'll be cooked. What can he do? Now, the purpose of h4 is to just play knight to g5, queen h5, and play like Mikhail Tal, just going into this all-out attack, which is actually pretty hard to stop by black, because you've got these also two bishops pointing towards the king side, and you have quite a lot of pieces ready to join the party. So what can they do? Some of them will realize that you're going to jump forward with the knight, and they'll try to stop that by going bishop to g4, which is wrong, because it's not helpful. In this case, you're going to sack the bishop right here on h7, and after that continue with knight to g5 anyways. This is checking the king, and it turns out that the position of this bishop on g4 was not only useless, it did not stop the knight from moving, it was actually even harmful, because now white is going to pick up this bishop on the next move. Taking on g5 does not help. After the trade, the black's king is still in check, they have to move, and now queen takes g4, we're getting back the bishop, plus we won this pawn on h7, with opened up the h-file, we're ready to play queen h5, queen h8 mate. Another natural attempt of black to stop you from going with your knight to g5 is playing h6 themselves. However, you ignore that and you go for your all-out attack knight to g5. After they accept the sacrifice, you follow up with another brilliant move, bishop to h7. That allows you to win the time for your attack, because after the king takes the bishop, you now have the move queen h5 with a check, forcing the king to move. Black never has time to do anything constructive. They have to move the king back and forth. Now, after pawn takes g5, you simply threaten queen to h8 or h7 checkmate along this h-file, and black is defenseless. If they ever try to escape through the f7 square, you lock the door and you play queen h8 anyway. Even if they move the rook anywhere, doesn't matter, queen h8 mate. After you strike in the center, in most cases your opponents are actually going to grab this pawn on d4, which is great, because we are not going to take it back straight away. Instead, we toss in this in-between move pawn e5, chasing their knight away. Certainly they do not want to undevelop it, but if the knight comes forward, then you can recapture this pawn with a queen while gaining one more tempo and hitting their knight. Of course, they could retreat back, but then the knight will be passive and you'll just continue developing. They instead play pawn to c6, trying to keep their knight in the central position, but it's another mistake. you anyway can push this knight away. However, this pawn on c6 obstructs the other one and it can't be brought into the game. Now we can just play casual moves, bishop c4, simply developing a bishop and putting more pressure right here. And you're ready to castle, play knight c3, bishop g5. Very simple moves, but you're going to have a strong attack. Moreover, they're still worried about this threat, and they have to waste even more time horsing around with this little horsey. And after they go knight to b6, you then can just castle, and you have a monstrous position. If they trade on c4, it becomes pretty apparent that black probably should have picked some other game. Not really chess is their hobby, because they haven't achieved anything within the first 8 moves. Plus, the only move they actually kinda did play, pawn to c6, was actually the wrong one, because now they can't develop their knight, which gives you just a superior position. Moreover, if they ever try to bring this bishop into play and castle, you can take advantage of their weak kingside straight away and play queen g4. For lack of this knight from f6, which black usually has across different openings, your queen stands well here and hits the pawn. If they try to castle, we can follow up with bishop to h6, another common attacking pattern. We're capitalizing on this pin and we're threatening queen to takes g7 mate. So the only solution for that would be playing pawn to g6, which would drop the rook, and after this you'll keep attacking. You'll probably wish to bring your knight somewhere here and attack all of their weaknesses. Feel free to post down below any questions if you have about this opening. Of course, it is hard and unnecessary to memorize a ton of opening variations. If you wish to find proper positional principles, to find good moves in any positions, then head to the free masterclass by clicking the link up there or down below in the description.